Welcome back to part 2 of Knowing Your Source. In the last video, I shared with you an experience that I had while dancing the Dying Swan and leaving my body and literally becoming that swan. As the years continued, I moved into my teenage years and became more and more fascinated with everything that related to the craft, the occult, the paranormal. So today what I'm going to share with you is a story of the floor opening, losing my wolf ring, and throwing away my tarot cards. I began to read a lot of information about witchcraft, whatever I could find. I thought that I would like to be able to do spell work. I wanted to know the witch's alphabet. I wanted to engage in all of those practices that I imagined the craft to be. To that end, I went to the library, I got a few books. I went to the bookstore and got a few books. But you also have to remember that at that point in time, there were not as many books available on the subject of witchcraft. And we didn't have a computer, so I had no resources as far as the internet was concerned. So I continued my readings, and I actually had a friend who I was dancing with who was also very much interested in the craft. And we imagined ourselves to be witches and all of those things that at that point in time we thought were part and parcel of what a witch was. Now, you also have to remember that at that point in time, it was very clearly demarked. There was black witchcraft and there was white witchcraft. White witchcraft aligned with all of those things that were positive, and black witchcraft involved all of those things that were negative, baneful, magic, etc., etc. So I thought that it would be interesting to practice some spell work and also to do a circle of my own where I would actually summon into that circle, into that space, a spirit that would, for all intents and purposes, be my servitor. Well, that wasn't exactly a really good idea, especially given that I really didn't know what I was doing at all. And reading a few books certainly does not give you enough information about what that type of work might look like, what the consequences could be, and, just exactly what was going to happen. Also at this time, I was very interested in vampires, and I wanted to be a vampire. And my mom and I shared a room. I grew up, as I think I told you, with my grandmother and my mom. My mom worked a lot, and we didn't have a whole lot of money. So we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. My grandmother, of course, had her own bedroom, and my mom and I shared a room. So my mom was actually very accommodating as I went through all of these varying phases. So part of the witchcraft interest also was tied in with vampires as well. And I even went to the extent of putting up black drapes in the bedroom that we shared. She was very accommodating of that because, vampires don't like the light. I had also bought myself this wolf ring that I had seen in one of the terminal stations when I was traveling down into Philadelphia to pursue my dancing. And there was a stand that was set up, and it had all sorts of really interesting silver jewelry. And one of the pieces was this rather large pewter wolf ring that had red eyes. And it was just the head of the wolf, and it had the red eyes, and I thought, this is absolutely perfect. So I saved up the money that I had earned from working at the library, and I bought myself this ring. And this ring tied into the whole vampire thing, and it also became my familiar in terms of working with the practices of the craft. So I had my wolf ring. I thought I was set. I had my book that had a spell or an incantation in it, told you how to set up the circle using the salt and the 4 candles, crafting the pentagram, and gave you, now this is the really important part, gave you the evocations to use in order to summon this spirit. Now, even that might have been something that might have helped me to possibly make a different choice. But of course, the evocation was in a hybrid of Latin and something else. And so I really didn't, and it had no translation. So I really didn't even know what I was saying, but it was in a book. So it had to be true. It had to be something you could use. And hey, I was going to try it. And of course, remember again, I was about 12 or 13. So I was in those teenage years where you can't tell a teenager anything. So my mom went to work, and she worked late at the post office until midnight. And so I went to bed early and shut our bedroom door, moved some things around, and set to working to open up this gate. Well, I did everything, set it all up, scribed the circle, had everything ready and waiting, and, was all geared up to go. And I began uttering the first few lines of the evocation. And as I began to utter it, the room suddenly became very, very dark. I felt the energy shift in the room, and I would swear to this day that the center of the floor began to part and began to open, which, of course, scared me to no end. I shut everything down immediately. Now, bear in mind, I've never taken drugs, didn't take drugs then. I don't really drink, never drank then. I was fully present. I was fully cognizant. So I can't even say that, maybe my experience was the result of something I had ingested, because I hadn't ingested anything. And I shut everything down as quickly as possible. Now, I had my wolf ring on. First of all, I was concerned. My first concern was, oh my goodness, what did I do? And my second concern was, oh my goodness, what is my mom going to say? Because surely she's going to notice that something is different in this room. Well, fortunately, as soon as I shut everything down, turned the lights back on, gathered all my supplies, put them in a box, and actually took them out to the trash, that's how scared I was, including the book, everything seemed to be back to normal. So my mom came home. I was asleep, didn't say anything, had my ring on, my wolf ring on, because that was very important to this particular ritual that I was doing. I hadn't taken it off. I had it on. I had it on when I went to bed. Woke up the next morning, and my ring was gone. Now, this ring fit very well on my finger, would not have slid off. There was no way I could have lost it. I noticed that the ring was gone a little bit into the day, and, my first thought was, oh, how did that happen? Because I never took the ring off, ever, even when I washed my hands, did not take my ring off. So I went home and I looked around a little bit. I looked under the bed. I looked all over. To this day, that ring has never turned up again. I had procured tarot cards. I was really excited about teaching myself the tarot. I had been able to find a few other books about the craft. That experience alone shut me down for several years in terms of doing anything that even vaguely resembled the work and the disciplines that would be part of training and learning to walk the witch's path. I threw away the tarot cards. I looked through all of my books, everything that I had that related to witchcraft or vampires. The occult stuff I kept as far as the paranormal, but those other things, I threw everything away. And the lesson of that was not so much the fear that was involved in what possibly I thought was actually going to happen, But it was the thought that and this was one of the first times I realized that this is really powerful stuff that I'm working with. And I don't have a clue as to what that power is or even how to use that power. And it gave me a newfound respect for the craft. But it also put me in a place where, well, if that could happen, what would happen if I learned how to use tarot cards? What would happen if I learned something else? What could I possibly open myself up to that, again, I was not ready for? So pretty much I turned my back on witchcraft per se for many, many years. It was not actually until a TV show that I was watching after I had my children, that I once again returned to witchcraft and realized and respected what it could be. I'm going to talk more about that in the next video, part 3, the final part. And that's another really interesting story about how I actually formally came back to the craft. From that point forward, I did as much reading as I could and followed and flowed into more of the Eastern practices and the philosophies. I had followed it all along, but that had kind of been pushed down to the surface or below the surface when I was actively engaging more in what we would call now the Western Hermetics. Again, these terms really weren't available to someone who was just searching on their own, and it was very much still one of those things where you were introduced to someone who knew someone, or you were invited to something, or you just happened across something. There was not the broad cross-pollination and cross-communication that you all are very, very much in tune with and aligned with, and for you, this is all second nature. But I turned my attentions more to the Eastern practices and the Eastern philosophies. Those seem to be things that, although I was also touching and dipping into the spiritual and the mystical realms of those things, they seemed, in my perspective, to be much more benign. At some point during my teen years into my early 20s, early adulthood, and through getting married, I got married when I was 21. You know, I was dancing a lot, I was doing a lot of other things, and my personal religious / spiritual background kind of took a back seat. When I was 18, I wanted to move to New York to pursue my dancing career. And so to that end, I doubled up on my junior and senior year in high school. I had the grades, I was able to do that, and I graduated early. And money prevented me from moving up as soon as I had wanted to. So I worked for a time at the post office, and eventually I was able to move up to New York, and I was actually living at the YMCA. They had one floor that was for women, and it was mostly people like myself who were engaged in the arts in some way. It was very reasonable. It was close to Lincoln Center. It was close to American Ballet Theater where I was. And you know, so it offered a lot of opportunities, but I also had some free time. And this was also when I got more involved with an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship. The founder is Paramahansa Yogananda, who is someone that was a yogi who trained and has become one of the ascended masters in the Eastern philosophies and Eastern practices. And they had a correspondence course, and I would get my course every week and read through it and do the practices and the exercises and all of those things. And as I was engaging in that pursuit and engaging in that stream of spirituality, I also was beginning to awaken, although at a very subtle level. I was also beginning to awaken all of those readings and all of those explorations that I had done regarding the craft and occult practices as well. And for me, it was a very beautiful blending of being able to see the reflection of one in the other, although I still was not interested in going back to the craft per se. I could appreciate a lot of the underpinnings and the crossing overs of learning about your energetic and your subtle bodies, learning how to use that energy to center and to calm yourself, how to affect change, which is basically what low magic and spell work is. And high magic, ceremonial work, is ultimately expanding that out to affecting a greater portion of what we consider to be the dynamics and the energy of this world that we inhabit and that we live in. So for many of those years, I delved very, very deeply into the Eastern philosophies, the Eastern practices, into the deities and some of the deities of the pantheon, the Hindu pantheon that fed into that. I explored a lot of the Tibetan and the Buddhist practices as well. And all of that served to feed what I needed at a spiritual level, because inherently that has always been my nature. Some people, are not necessarily overtly in need of having a spiritual path or a spiritual practice. And when I say in need, I don't think of it in terms of something as it being something that is external. This is an internal calling. This is something that comes from within, that even if what others would consider to be a spiritual practice you do not necessarily embrace, you still are trying to live a life that is in accord with other life, with the energy that surrounds you, and with who and what you are, in recognizing that you are so much more than just this flesh and bone. So during all of these periods of time when I was in and out of a variety of different practices and belief systems, I taught Sunday school for a while in the Unity Church that we belong to, which is metaphysically based. All of those things I consider to be my training and my building of a knowledge base that has brought me to where I am now, where I can synthesize, I can syncretically use a variety of different streams of practice to inform who and what I am in both my personal work, as well as the work that I do within our coven and the tradition. So I explored more deeply while I was up in New York. And then when I got married at 21, my husband was 23, there really was not much time for any of those things. My spiritual practice was my dancing. I went back to that. Just stepping into a studio was the equivalent of stepping into the most sacred of temples that you could step into. Excuse me. Rehearsing was the equivalent of practicing the most sacred and highest of art forms that you could practice. And performing, that was my opportunity to express the ritual of being able to move your body through time and space, aligned with the music so seamlessly that you could transport other people to that place with you. So all of those things that I had studied just kind of stayed on the back burner. 10 years later, after we got married, we started having our children. And at that point in time, we had 5 under 5. So I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was very, very busy and very, very involved in our children's lives. The next video that I'm going to do for you, the last and final of this Knowing Your Source, I'm going to talk a little bit about the time that I was home and some of the things that I actually did with our children to encourage and foster in them an exploration of what is available in terms of religious and spiritual pursuits. And I'm also going to share with you a story about how I returned to the path of the craft and how I've moved through that ever since. I hope you are enjoying getting to know me a little bit better. I hope you also enjoyed the 13 days of walking the witch's path that I posted the videos each day. That was another way, again, of showing you a little bit of what it actually means, or how someone can actually apply a lot of these principles that you hear and you read about largely in theory, but sometimes it's a little confusing as to how you can actually practice them. So I hope that all of these things are helping you to formulate, and you also are having perhaps some aha moments in your own personal experiences that you can track back, as I said in the first video, to some of those first times that the magic of the world opened itself to you. And whether you were actively a participant in that and aware of it really doesn't matter, because, you know, time is something that we've placed and we've put hard fixtures on in looking at it through a linear phase of chronology. But actually, it doesn't really matter, because all of the experiences that we've had in the past inform who we are in the present, and all of those experiences that we are having currently and remaining fully present in this present space of our time are going to be the underpinnings and the foundation from which we arise in our future workings. So until next time, I hope you have a blessed day, and I look forward to talking with you again. After the next video, the third video, I'm going to be beginning my series, and I haven't quite finalized what that topic is going to be, as far as a group of videos that are all going to relate to and go into more detail about a specific type of work or practice or whatever. So in the meanwhile, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Enjoy all of nature, and most importantly, honor and respect who and what you are in all of the worlds. Blessed be.